Welcome in, Falcons fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for more Atlanta Falcons content. And as we continue our Atlanta Falcons offseason coverage, they are currently in minicamp right now. And I wanted to bring in a guy who some people may say is one of the faces of the community, depending on who you are. He does a lot of great work for the Falcoholic, has his own show, Falcoholic Live. He's also a Believe Brethren as well. Kevin Knight, welcome in, man. How are you?
Good. It's good to be back. I know we were talking before the show. We got to have you back on the aforementioned Falcoholic Live as well. So it's a good time to. This is a good time of the year to like reconnect with everyone and build out your guest list for the season. And get everybody accustomed, get to that friend of the show status. So
Yeah.
It's a good time to be on, and this is a great time because this is the last vestige of like actual news we'll have, for probably about a month exactly. So excited to be here for this and not, the deep dead zone, but we could do it either way. I'm sure the two of us, we can handle it. We're professionals. We find something compelling no matter what. So
yeah, exactly. Listen, you got to dig a little bit. As long as we're not too clickbaity, we're digging and we're finding some stuff, and you got to really get into the nitty gritty of things. So. But yeah, man, I definitely appreciate you, man. Like I said, I know you're busy taking time out to come on, man, and talk some Falcons with me for sure. And so, like you said, this is the last organized activities before training camp. Before people take time off, that last vacation for the players. Maybe you got a couple of guys who still try to get some work in. Everybody's different around this time period. But right now, like I said, we're in it right now, and so. I think a lot of people right now view this team in a way of everybody's trying to figure out, okay, from a talent perspective, especially offensively, it's like, all right, it seems like the goal here is postseason. It feels very postseason or bust, Raheem, after how last year ended, especially, a lot of people are kind of already on thin ice with him as well. But they've made some additions. They went after the dress the pass rush. They've added some slow, I like to say, underrated free agent positions in Morgan Fox and Divine. Right now, where we sit and what we've heard from camp and just all the things they're trying to implement, what is your current feeling gauge on the team as of right now?
I feel pretty good about it. I feel better, certainly. Like, free agency was disappointing, and like, even though I think those of us that had followed the financial situation and other stuff closely, we knew it was going to be an underwhelming free agency. That wasn't a surprise, but it still is sort of like, this just doesn't really move the needle, for me. But the draft was their opportunity to kind of flip the script and really energize the fan base with, and they absolutely did that. Once again, kind of stole the headlines on day one, and they really, I think, took advantage of the board just falling in their favor. And it's not something that, Terry Fontenot has always been known for. I think early in his career, there was a lot more, we're just going to go for our guys, and we don't really care so much about the overall value. And obviously that term in itself is subjective, right? Because the media sort of invents this value around guys. But, the consensus board, we've had one for several years now. Shout out to Arif Hassan for like managing that and really tracking it. And we do know now that teams that tend to follow the consensus board tend to draft better overall. Now, this isn't like 30 years of data or anything, it's more like 5 to 7, but it is, so far it tracks. And the Falcons this year were one of the best teams at getting value per the consensus board. I think that played out, just with the eye test, with who they got. And obviously, anytime you trade up for multiple first rounders, that's going to help your value proposition. But, I thought the way they played the draft was really smart. They needed the pass rush injection that they couldn't really afford to sit on their hands. They didn't have the free agency money to throw around to get or trade for one of these like superstar pass rushers. So the best way to do it is to get a guy, like Leonard Floyd, who can be a really good sort of third down specialist, a guy that you can depend on to be a finisher for you. Bring in, two of the best pass rushers as rookies, Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr., and then sort of lean on this stable of guys you've been developing to kind of come through for you, hopefully this year with Arnold Ebiketie. He's sort of always been this, good number 2, number 3 guy that just has been asked to carry the load, and we just know that he can't do it. But in this group, maybe he takes that step forward because he doesn't have to be the only guy anymore. And, Zach Harrison going back to edge, it's exciting. Brandon Dorless is going to see the field maybe. So I think you just come away from the draft feeling a lot better about the pass rush specifically, but the defense as a whole, because they added Xavier Watts, who is just one of my favorite players. And I just feel really good about the direction of the team, especially given that the defense was kind of what we were worried about holding this team back. And you're not as worried about that anymore, given the investments and the moves that they made so far.
Yeah, and I think, too, to touch on is obviously there's a lot of youth on the defense, especially. I mean, overall, I would say the team, for the most part, in a lot of key positions is young. Quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end. Like, it's not like we have just older guys across the entire roster playing in major spots. And this kind of goes back to a little bit what Terry talked about when they kind of got with Raheem about you're trying to compete now, but be sustainable. And I think some people say it's like that's impossible. Like, you either got to go all in and you got to just say screw the future, or you got to make sure you're just developing for that. And so far for what you've seen, do you feel like they've still stood to that, even though they were more aggressive this offseason, but they were aggressive in the draft? Younger players, those guys, because it feels like things work out. You have guys that you can build around and be cornerstones of the defense and offense in their early 20s for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely got more aggressive with their draft assets this year, executing multiple trade ups, cleverly adding a day 2 pick as a part of a trade up, which that was just my tip to cap. It's like, yeah, I read about 12 mock drafts. I never ever fathomed that being an option, but that was really savvy. And like you said, it's sort of like, can they keep it going? Financially, they'll be in better shape after this year, assuming that, something does happen with Kirk Cousins, which I'm sure that will be a topic at some point. So we'll spoil that discussion. But, I think you look at the moves that they made in a vacuum and like, yes, you did mortgage your future draft assets in next year's first round pick. So now what that means is that you need to make sure you didn't make a mistake, obviously, with the selection of James Pierce. Like, if you're going to trade a future first for him, now he has to hit. So that's part one. Part two is that, like, you need to make that asset you gave up not be crushing, right? You can't fail this year. This isn't there's no option for tanking, which this team wouldn't do that anyway. But there's not really a pathway for you underperforming and anyone being okay with it. It's sort of like if you underperform and you hand the Rams, a top 15 pick, there's probably going to be big problems in Flowery Branch, to say the least. I mean, we already know that this coaching staff may be on thin ice. I mean, Blake is very patient, right? And I think ultimately that's a good thing. I think it's better to have an owner that waits too long to fire someone than fires someone way too early, and then you have constant turnover and churn, and that doesn't work for teams either. So, I do think this is a year where this team kind of has to put the pieces together to get a winning record and make the postseason and all these things. And if they accomplish that, I don't think anyone's really going to care that they gave up next year's first. Because if we're talking about a pick in the 20s, you traded a pick in the 20s for a pick in the 20s, and the pick last year, according to value, is more valuable than the future pick. So, I think the Falcons could easily come out ahead in this trade at the end of the day, but you do have to find ways to mitigate that lost asset. And we'll see what those might be. Obviously this, Kirk Cousins trade that I've teased now twice in the first like 8 minutes of the show. That could get you an asset potentially. Nothing like crazy, more than likely, but can't rule it out. I mean, teams get weird for quarterbacks, right? Kyle Pitts is another option. There might be some other things that people haven't considered. Tyler Allgeier is one that sometimes gets brought up. You have to build out. You're not going to get another first for any of these guys, so you're probably not getting that first back. But can you build out an extra day 2 pick to help with that? Can you get some extra early day 3 picks, and you can kind of build this deep class around the middle of the draft instead of a high asset, and that can still return good value for you. You can't go too far in one direction or the other like we saw the Rams do for all those years. But yeah, I mean, given what the Falcons have done, I do think the team is sustainable from a cap standpoint. We're going to start getting into a situation where we have to start making decisions like it's going to be Pitts or London, right? I don't know that there was much of a chance that, if Pitts was amazing and this, number 1 overall tight end in the NFL, yes, they'll find a way to pay him and London and they'll make it work. But the signing of Mooney was kind of a signal that they're not really thinking that's going to be something that they're considering. But we'll see. But I think, yeah, financially, once the Kirk contract is sort of taken care of, they'll be sustainable for next year and the year after. The first several until they pay Penix, theoretically they should have a lot to work with. And I don't think they're done either. I think this team is going, given what we said a minute ago, right, which is that they can't really afford to lose now. They can't be bad, and they certainly can't be bad. They can't really be mediocre either. They need to maximize this season and next season. And I think that means that we will see more moves, as time goes on. Last year, their two biggest moves arguably came right before the season, with Matt Judon and Justin Simmons. And obviously, neither one worked out as well as people hoped. I think the Simmons one was fine. Judon was not fine, but we like the moves. So, hey, hindsight 2020, but, I'm interested to see what they do end up doing, but I don't think they're done. So,
yeah. And I think too, I mean, we hear so many names right now connected to the team, obviously in terms of getting traded and guys that they could pick up. I do want to ask you about that. Jair Alexander, he's a guy. Some people wondered the Jerry Gray connection. Is that a possibility? We've heard about Jalen Ramsey most of this offseason. We've heard Raheem say they're willing to experiment with Hughes doing some nickel. So does that mean that outside corner is up for grabs? Do you see them getting involved in any of those two guys, even though there's connections with the coaching staff and those players?
Yeah, I mean, I think both could be in play. I think Ramsey wants to go to the Rams, so that's probably the biggest stumbling block to Ramsey. I think the Falcons would be very interested, assuming the price is, a day 3 pick for Ramsey, because he can play the slot, and that's probably his best fit now, given, he's kind of slowed down a little bit, but I think he's still a very good slot defender. Jair, I think, still has a lot of upside. The thing with him is the injuries. But look, if you have Jair, playing outside with Mike Hughes and you kind of let those two duke it out and see let the best man win, then you're not so concerned about Jair's injuries if you have a guy in Mike Hughes right behind him who you can trust. And, for me, it's like I'm not putting Mike Hughes back in the slot. Look, he's a UCF legend, all right, give him his respect. But he's an outside corner. He's an outside corner. Stop playing around with him in the slot. He's just not very good with the two-way go. But outside, he's much better. He's a legit NFL CB2 outside. And props to him. He's honestly a value at $6 million a year playing there. But just stop it with the inside stuff. I know Jerry Gray's obsessed with having him play the slot. It's not going to happen. Stop trying to make it happen. Okay. But we got Billy Bowman. He's going to be really interesting. I'm curious to see if he can just sort of seize that job, quickly. D Alford, I think the thing with D Alford is he's a better man coverage corner. And if they're not going to play much man, it's just not a great fit for him. But I still think he's a good depth option no matter what. I think Jerry Gray's, not Jerry Gray, the other guy, the guy, the unmentionable, Jimmy Lake, I know D has some takes probably about Jimmy Lake.
Yeah.
And, that was not helping him at all. So I think part of it was definitely that. But, I think D Alfred's certainly rosterable and like a good depth corner. We know he can play outside too. So I know some people are like, oh, he's a bum. He needs to be out here. No, it's not like that. He's a good depth corner at worst. So I think their corner depth is actually good. But yeah, I could definitely see like a Ramsey or a Jair if they're really trying to like elevate this and kind of take away the question mark in the slot by either adding Jalen, there, or just sort of adding just a guy in Jair who maybe I don't know if he can play slot. Maybe he can. I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, he's just been so good outside when he's healthy that no one's really ever asked him to do that. But I think they could sort of be like, look, we're going to have this elite secondary, and then we're going to turn these young pass rushers loose. I think that's a recipe for something. I hope it's good, but if it could be average, that would be way better than last year. So hey, I'd be down for that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I said I feel like after the approach of everything, it seems like obviously when you get after the passer, create pressure, get sacks, things of that nature, but also create turnovers. And that's why you get the ball hawk guys that you got, Billy Bowman, Xavier Watts. We know what Jesse Bates can do. AJ Terrell got some interceptions last year, so we know he'd be on the trending up on that way. So I think there's definitely, like I said, a plan in place. Now, an interesting comment that did come out of minicamp so far is that Divine Diablo, he's a guy who, again, one of those guys who, doesn't really, pick up. But I think a lot of people are like, what, there's potential, there's upside, athletic. The Falcons defense didn't need more speed. And, Raheem's saying that, hey, he's earned it with Cade that he could potentially get a green dot and that he is fitting better than maybe they even expected. What does that say? What are your expectations for Divine? Because it seems like he'll be a starter this year, and there seems to be some expectations for him in that linebacking core.
Yeah, I think Divine was always like the wild card signing to me, and I love when teams do a wild card signing because it's like, yeah, we don't know. I think the worst is like Divine is like an average linebacker, which is fine. That's not great value for what you paid him, but I don't think he's ever going to be a terrible negative on the field or anything like that. But I think the upside is that this is like the defense for him, right? This Quinn style defense. The small linebackers are perfect fits. The sideline to sideline guys. He's a former safety. He's got obviously the coverage chops to go along with it. I know PFF hates his coverage. I think you watch the tape. It's not that bad. I don't like PFF's coverage grading is probably the thing I like the least. And I do like PFF grading, like guys, has a place. I think it's a good data point, especially for offensive and defensive line, or especially offensive line, where you don't really have a lot of data points other than just like pressure rate allowed. And that's only part of the story. But the coverage grades don't put too much stock into them. And I would say like watch the tape, but understanding coverage responsibilities and all that, not an easy watch, let's be honest. So I don't blame anyone for having trouble deciphering, PFF graders included, like what is this linebacker who's dropping into like a zone supposed to be doing here? But I think he's got the instincts for it. I think he's got the build for it, the athleticism. I think it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I do expect at this point, the two linebackers that are going to play 100% of the snaps or close to it will be Caden Ellis and Divine Diablo. And then we'll see how the other guys mix in. It doesn't seem like Jalen Walker is going to be playing much linebacker early. I do wonder how much like sort of Sam overhang stuff we'll see from him, because I think that's a way to get him on the field in like a base package without him having to play like, hand in the dirt against an offensive tackle, which may not be great for him as a run defender. But, they have like Troy Anderson. I think Troy, it hasn't come together for him, mostly I think due to injuries, but he's a great wild card guy too, that, if he can stay healthy, he's just a really nice third linebacker to have that can do basically anything for you. And might be a blessing in disguise for the Falcons. If Troy doesn't, like, if he has a good but not great season, doesn't pop off, you can re-sign him at a reasonable number. I think he could easily outperform that long term and just be a really good, sort of third linebacker for you. We'll see how that develops. But yeah, I think the linebacker core with Divine certainly is going to be better. Last year it was just with Landman and Ellis out there for a lot of it. It was just the lack of sideline to sideline mobility was just this crushing thing for them. They just really couldn't keep up with Jaden Daniels, notably. But mobile quarterbacks and these teams that like to really make you run sideline to sideline, that's just not what those guys were built for. And I think having a guy like Divine gives you an option to match up there that's a lot better equipped to handle those responsibilities.
Yeah, and I think too, like I said, they want to be able to be more physical, be able to go after the teams that like to go sideline to sideline, like the Commanders. You're going to play some mobile quarterbacks. So being able to just handle that would obviously be one of the big steps that they want to take. And, I think Jeff is going to come in there, and obviously he's been a part of some really good defenses, even with, he was in Atlanta, then he went to the Jets. And, we know what type of defense they've had, especially under Robert Saleh. So I think, and the thing I always say, the difference between him and Jimmy Lake was that it seems like Jeff has like a type of player and a type of way he wants to play and all of these things figured out, where I feel like Jimmy was just like, all right, we're just going to run this scheme and see what happens. And so I feel like he never really maximized any player on the defense. Cause I said, there's no way everybody on the defense is regressing. That isn't, if it's a couple of players, okay. If it's the entire defense, that's a coaching issue. So, obviously, so a lot of people have a lot of different things they can say about Jimmy Lake.
We have a lot of feelings about Jimmy Lake. Yes.
But, we were able to move forward, and we have a guy who has a plan and knows what he wants to do, changing the type of front they are, going to more of an attacking front, using Zach Harrison as like a big edge with Brandon Dorless, and now adding veteran and youth into the defensive line to help increase the pass rush. So those are all things that I think are trending upwards for the team. Now, we've talked a lot about defense so far, but we've got to go to the offensive side of the ball. And obviously the big question I think everybody has on that side is Michael Penix. Not because of, oh my God, like Desmond Ridder, like, is he good? It's not that. I think a lot of people think he will be good. Obviously, we'll have to see till he's the fill full time. It's just about, with the expectations coming into the season, the fact that they are trying to make the postseason, what will Penix's season look like? And so my question to you is, how are you feeling about Michael Penix right now, especially now, getting the first team reps all the way through, finding his voice that Raheem's mentioned a couple of times, and just what are your expectations for him going into the second year? What do you want to see from him first and foremost?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Penix, it's just doing the little things right. I think he did the big things right. Like, we saw the explosive plays, the big time throws. I mean, I think Penix had as many big time throws in like the last two games as like some quarterbacks had in like half a season. He just let it rip those last 2 games, and that was great. Where we didn't see the consistency, but that's not crazy for a guy who's only started a couple games. But to me, it's like now we just need Penix to sort of hit the little things, like those little passes out of the backfield or the little short things or stuff over the middle that was just the placement was a little off or the footwork was a little off, whatever it was. Like, just nailed the small stuff, because the big flash plays, he's got those. Like, we're going to get those. That's not a concern to me, which is funny because that's, I think, the concern for a lot of quarterbacks. But for Penix, I think it's just kind of nailing the small stuff and bringing everything together, getting on the same page with all the receivers. And I think he will get there. I did a show with JP Acosta from SB Nation last week. It was a lot of fun. JP did like a whole deep dive on Penix and just came away really impressed. And, it's really like, yeah, he does the flashy explosive stuff super well. He's got an absolute cannon. His placement, like outside the numbers on the sideline throws, is some of the best you'll see in the league. He can hit that stuff. As a result, I think he's going to be absolutely lethal against the blitz, because he can just rip that thing downfield without too much windup time, without needing to, he doesn't need a clean. With Kirk, that was the thing. Like, if Kirk had a totally clean pocket and time to wind it up, like, he could still throw deep to the sideline if he had the perfect situation. Penix doesn't necessarily need the perfect situation. He can just launch that thing, off a 3-step drop or whatever, and it's really special. That's where he's the most special, I think, is those throws outside the numbers deep down the field. And I think that's going to be a huge part of the Falcons offense that we didn't really see for most of the season with Kirk. And then it's just, can you sort of supplement that with more of over the middle stuff, which we know he's not as comfortable throwing from his time in college. They didn't ask him to do it a lot because he was so dominant throwing outside. So, and that's the muddy part of the field. That's the part where quarterbacks, you start looking in there and it's like, I don't trust the safety. He's creeping up. I don't like how this linebacker's dropping. I'd like it. There's a lot of things that you have to learn and watch for when you're throwing to the middle that you don't always have to watch for when you're throwing to the deep sideline, because that guy is like, okay, can I hit this in between the corner? He's already got the safety's not going to get there. He's beat the corner. Now I just have to make sure it's not going out of bounds. Whereas if you're throwing over the middle, it's like, if I throw this too high, this is a pick. If I throw this too far to the right, it's a pick. If I throw this too far to the left, the sideline throws a lot safer, because like, if I throw this too far, it's just incomplete. It's going out of bounds. So just getting comfortable with that. Obviously, like you said, finding his voice, becoming more of an established leader, the confidence, and he showed those things obviously in his first few starts as well. But I think with this full off season behind him, now's the opportunity for him to just take the next step as a leader as well. And it's kind of up to the Falcons, I think, to make sure the offensive line is still good around him. It was over his starts. I think he was not heavily pressured. He avoided pressure well. He had a very low sack rate, and that's partially him, but it's also the Falcons' offensive line. So, can Ryan Newsel replicate what Drew Dalman was able to do with Penix, and can hopefully Caleb McGarry will be healthy. I know his health is apparently a concern at this point. Doesn't sound like it's a long-term thing, but McGarry, can he hold up over a season protecting left-handed quarterbacks blind side? We haven't really seen that. So a couple of questions there, but I mean, the sky's the limit. Like this guy has shown he's got the arm talent and the ability to be a franchise quarterback. Now we just need to see him do it over the course of a season.
Yeah. And I think too, for him, I think, like I said, you can see he's a confident guy. I mean, we heard what he said about Drake London, people wondering if he's underappreciated. He said it won't be after this season. Yeah. And so he's been confident. He said Drake will make sure he's appreciated. Pitts, I think we can make him what people expect. Like, he says the things that you want to hear from a guy. He believes in his weapons, and I think that's one of the most important things you do, especially as a young quarterback, and you're getting the trust and the chemistry with the players. Because a lot of things too last year, people would say it's just he didn't have the reps with the guys because he wasn't the first team guy. He had the reps with like second team, third team guys. That's why, if you notice in some of the camp videos, especially in the one they just dropped on their YouTube, there was a lot of we saw some Casey Washington highlights. Like he has a great rapport of Casey Washington because that's who he worked with primarily. So I mean, and that could be beneficial for Casey. So I think Penix is definitely on a good trajectory up, and I'm excited to kind of see how things continue to grow as things move on. But obviously talking about the next guy in the room, Kirk Cousins. So obviously with Aaron Rodgers signing with Pittsburgh, a lot of people feel like, all right, so it looks like Kirk is stuck. There's nobody really that you right now that stands out as a place. You're kind of waiting for a major injury, or maybe a team who has an open quarterback competition hates all their quarterbacks. Maybe, I don't know. But Kirk showed up to camp. He's been professional. I think the media wants to make it bigger than what it is at times. I think Raheem even mentioned it's been kind of boring. I think people want Kirk Cousins to show up and then Raheem's like, darn, he's here. Crap. and that's just not how it is. He's going to come in, be professional. He's going to work. He's going to still work with Penix. He says that, hey, if I'm going to be here, I want us to have a championship at the end of the year. How do you see the Cousins situation playing out? Because it seems like he will be on this roster as of right now at the start of the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cousins is like you summed it up well. Like the Falcons are comfortable waiting for an injury. As morbid as that sounds, like no one's cheering on an injury, guys. It's just the nature of the game. Like we already saw Anthony Richardson has a throwing shoulder injury that might keep him out, through all of training camp and perhaps beyond. And we haven't even gotten through minicamp yet. So it's going to happen. And not only is it going to happen, it's probably going to happen to more than one team. Like we're not just talking about one injury. Like there's going to be quarterback injuries, and it sucks. It's one of the worst things that can happen to a team. It could completely derail your season. And Kirk Cousins is like a get out of jail free card for that. Is he as good as the guy he's going to replace? Probably depends on the team, depends on the team. But for most of these teams, probably not. But can he keep a good offense afloat? Yes. If he's not dealing with an undisclosed or minorly disclosed injury, however you read that situation, then yes, he can. I mean, you saw it with the Falcons. The Falcons were 6-3 with Kirk Cousins. They had a very good offense around him. They had good weapons, good offensive line. If you got that, Kirk can be a top 15 quarterback easily. But he's also, I think, prone to situation more than a lot of guys, in that I think if you have a bad offensive line, you're asking for trouble. You're just going to get him killed. So it's going to be a little bit situation dependent, but yeah, it's the Falcons have that sort of ace in the hole that we have the last guy that's available. And sooner or later, someone's going to need him. So we'll hold him. But the thing nobody talks about when they're doing this is like, oh, well, Aaron Rodgers went to Pitt. So now the Falcons are stuck with them. Falcons are fine with that, because guess what? As much as it sucks to consider this timeline, there's no guarantee that the Falcons aren't the team that needs Kirk Cousins. So it's better to have him here than somewhere else if that happens. So you might as well hold him. For many reasons, one being that there's absolutely no point to cutting him, and there never really was. So there's no point to that. So if you're not going to cut him, you're not going to trade him away for nothing or take on all of his money just to get him off the roster for the reasons that you just said. Cousins is a total professional and has been the entire time he's here. Yes, he's got a big mouth, and can cost you some picks, from that. But that's not a lack of professionalism. That's more of a lack of candor, or maybe too much candor. So that's just also in his personality. But Cousins, despite what this narrative that some people seem absolutely desperate to push, he's not a locker room problem. He doesn't have a bad relationship with Michael Penix. I think the two of them actually like each other quite a lot. Like they have a good relationship. It's never been Cousins doesn't like Penix and resents Penix. Why would he resent Penix? Penix isn't the one that drafted him. If anything, he would resent the team leadership for doing that, but he's not a guy that's he understands the game. I mean, he's been around this league a long time. This is what happens. The players aren't your enemy. It's if anything, it's the front office, right? So there's no reason to be rude to your teammates because the front office does something like that. So now we're at the situation where it's just a waiting game, and we're going to be waiting a while longer, more than likely. But I do think before the end of training camp, before the end of preseason, Cousins will be traded. And at that point, I mean, depending on how bad the need is, or if 2 injuries happen in the same week, then all of a sudden you're talking about there's a bidding war going on all of a sudden, because now that's how close to the line we are for quarterback talent. Like right now, there's no open spots, but there's also one starting quarterback available. So like you get 2 injuries in preseason week 1, or training camp in preseason week 1, and then all of a sudden there's one quarterback for 2 teams, and then it can flip in an instant. So, I think the Falcons were wise to just sit on this. They know the type of player Kirk is, and professional. He's not going to cause problems. He's going to show up when he has to, and for voluntary stuff, he won't. But I don't think they really care too much about that. It's about, I mean, ultimately, like, Cousins doesn't need the reps. He just doesn't. Like, he knows the offense now. He's been in it for a year. He's fine. So they're probably fine with getting more reps for Easton Stick and Emory Jones or whoever else they end up bringing in. So, yeah, it's sort of like it definitely feels like a narrative that's been. This is a very much a June narrative. Like, oh, Cousins, is he going to show up? Is he going to No, the answer is no. But like, I understand, guys, it's June, so we got to push something. But yeah, unfortunately, Cousins is just very boring. Like, he's a very boring, like, personality. He's not going to cause a lot of drama or anything like that. And that's probably part of the calculus for the Falcons adding him, which was, we know he's not going to cause problems. So there you go. Other than maybe costing you a mid-day 3 pick for a little bit, but that's just who he is. He is who he is, and that's who he's going to be. So easy to manage, easy to keep track of. No surprises, and the Falcons will hold the ships, and eventually they'll cash out. And whether it's a great return, a mediocre return, whatever, they'll get something for him. They'll get the cap relief, and with any luck, it'll all sort of come, at the right time. Towards the end of the season, they'll find a trade partner for Cousins, get a pick, and then maybe that will open up enough cap space for them to make one of these major moves. Maybe Trey Hendrickson is still disgruntled. Maybe one of these other players is still disgruntled. Maybe somebody we haven't even talked about suddenly becomes available, or there's a late camp cut or whatever. So, lots on the table, but there's not really a rush, for the Falcons with regards to Kirk Cousins. And even though there seems to be a rush by the national media to get him off the Falcons roster, that's not shared by the Falcons. They're totally, when Raheem says they're comfortable having him on the roster week 1, he's absolutely correct. They are. So we'll see.
Yeah. And I think too, it's funny because I also tell people, listen, this preseason, you probably, if Raheem sticks to what he did last year, you probably won't see Penix. And you definitely ain't going to see Kirk. Yeah, because they're not going to risk the injury. So you're going to see a lot of Easton Stick and Emory Jones leading the offense. So, to protect that investment just in case something happens. So, I think it's, like I said, not a lot to it. We'll have to see how it continues to move on. I don't see it becoming a big issue. But, media got to push something, and they'll do what they do. Now, another player who is also in the media eye is Kyle Pitts. He's we got the reports like, oh, teams are calling him. Falcons want a day 2 to start discussion, things of that nature. When I had Daniel on last week and we were talking about it, he kind of had mentioned the thing about it, and the reason why he doesn't think they're going to do it is because they really don't have many other tight ends. Like, even though we know the tight end is like not a huge part of the offense that Zach runs, you still want a guy that's like, all right, he can make a play if needed, because Charlie Warner isn't a pass catching guy. He's a block guy, and the next best receiving option you have is the undrafted free agent from South Carolina, which, listen, I've said he may make the team just because there's not really any tight end. He may be tight end 3 just by default. So, what do you think about that situation? Is that, do you also kind of agree with that premise? Like, they really don't have anybody else, or do you think they legitimately would? Because it sounds like one of those things where I don't think they want to move him, but they're open to listening. We've heard that Pitts isn't necessarily dying to leave, but at the same time, he also recognizes he could potentially have a bigger opportunity somewhere else. How do you see that playing out for the team? So I would also think Penix, since he's been so vocal about him, a guy who would probably be like, I would love Pitts to stay here and let's see what we can do together.
Yeah, I think part of the calculus is always that you're looking, from a GM standpoint about next year. Like, what are we doing with Kyle Pitts next year? How do we maximize the value of this asset? On the field, the best thing he can do is play for the Falcons this year and see if he can live up to that potential, because everyone just assumes he's a bust, and he's never going to live up to that pick more than likely. But if Kyle Pitts does come out and have this season that we've been waiting for, where he gets like over 1,000 yards as a tight end, then all of a sudden he's going to be one of the hottest names on the market next year as a tight end. And in that situation, which would be like the best case scenario, the Falcons probably tag and trade, or they just tag him and keep him for one more year, because the tight end tag is not expensive. It's like $11 million. Maybe it'll be more next year, but so that they could go that route if they want to, or they tag and trade for a premium pick at that point. Because guess what, guys? Kyle Pitts will be 25 next offseason. 25. So like this isn't a 30-year-old coming up for his third contract where you're going to have trouble moving him. No. Like if he can prove that he's figured it out, or maybe he just proved that he needs a quarterback, not the revolving door that the Falcons have had for the last 3-4 years since Matt Ryan left. I think that the Pitts absolutely could be a great asset to have next year. At the same time, the most likely scenario is probably a slightly better season than last year, maybe last year plus 10% or whatever. And that would be probably a top 10 tight end season, but probably not worth this like crazy extension that he would be asking for given his age and trajectory and all that. So if you're not willing to tag him next year off of that, then your options for recouping an asset are pretty limited. So in that scenario, the Falcons may just jump at a second. Like if they can get a second, we already know, we talked about at the top of the show, they don't have a first. So they probably need, if they could get another second round pick, that would be clutch. That would be terrific. Like you don't have a first, but you got 2 seconds. You're okay with that. You're still going to have 2 premium picks. Hopefully, at least 1 top 50 pick. Although if you're really good, maybe you don't, but I would take that. I would accept that our second round pick might be closer to 60, or something if they're really good. But I think if they do get an offer of a second, then I think they're likely to take it, because that's likely to be plus value for Pitts. That also offers an opportunity for him to outperform that. So it's possible. But more than likely, teams right now are going to be lowballing the Falcons. I don't even know if anyone's offering a day 3 pick at this point. But I don't think a third is getting it done either. Like I think the Falcons would want a third plus, like they'd want a third and a fifth minimum or something like that, because they don't have a fifth right now either. So I think they'd be considering that offer. But at this point, his value is depressed, right? I mean, he's a borderline top 10 tight end who's still young, but doesn't offer much as a blocker. He's going to be a fit for some teams and not for others. So, the great offers probably aren't going to come, but we could see him be more of a trade deadline move, particularly if he's playing well, but the Falcons offense is mostly running through the wide receivers still. Like he's having some good plays here and there, but he's just more like the third or fourth option. The Falcons are basically running at 11 personnel most of the time, and teams see that he's looking good, and they're like, okay, well, we can, we're willing to pony up that second round pick now. We think Pitts is the piece to take us over the edge. So we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, I think the baseline expectation now is that he will be on the Falcons roster at least through the beginning of the year, and maybe through, up to the trade deadline, and we'll probably reconvene at the trade deadline. But things could change. There's a guy out there, like Gerald Everett, has the connection with the coaching staff. He is just a free agent. He's just sitting out there. So if they do get a great offer for Pitts, maybe Everett is sort of the stopgap while they bring like Josh Simon up to speed. And, more than likely, like if they do move Pitts, they'll make the tight end mostly a blocker. They'll have a guy like Charlie Werner out there doing mostly blocking. And, that's probably okay too. But yeah, like you said, there's not really anyone else behind Werner either. So like if Werner's your starter, now we need like another blocking tight end to back him up, because we don't really have that either. So, that could be like a camp cuts thing. It could be maybe they just go sign Gerald Everett for the depth, and my guess is that they've been in contact with Everett, and they're like, yeah, we'll keep you on the short list. We're not going to make you show up to minicamp, but we'll stay in contact, and we'll let you know in training camp if we decide we need to get a veteran in here. They've done this before with a lot of positions. It's very common. So we'll see how that plays out. But there's a couple options left. It's pretty slim pickings, but we'll see if the offer comes in. That's really the question. Is anybody pony up that second round pick or not? So
yeah, it's all about offers. You don't ever want to try to get fleeced. It's a lot of making sure you get the value you think needed, or to make you feel like, well, if you really want this guy, then you got to really come up with something to make me want to give the guy up. Because it's not like we're desperate to get rid of him. And I think that's always the thing that I feel like they've tried to do with Kirk and even Pitts. Is like, we're not desperate to move these guys. So like this is not a situation where we'll just take anything we can get to get them off the team. And I think that's a very big, important point when you're talking about the negotiation standpoints, when you're talking about trades with other GMs. So I think they've really done a good job there. So obviously we kind of heard, obviously we expect London to continue to, progress as a wide receiver one. We've heard Ike Hilliard kind of come out and say Darnell Mooney, we expect even more from him. Obviously if he didn't get hurt at the end of last season, he probably would have finished with 1,000-yard season. And I've said this. I said some people are still not convinced Mooney is him. And I'm just like, guys, I don't know what you're watching. I don't know if they thought the Chicago. I don't know if they just think that was all what he truly was outside of the 1,000-yard season. I don't know. But I could see him with Penix, especially now at quarterback, really benefiting a guy like Mooney, especially in the deep play, big plays, things like that, because he can run it. I think he runs like 4.3, So when you look at, so we know what those two guys are bringing. Now, when you look at the rest of the receivers, I think people look at Ray. He was good for them last year. Some people wonder, is that an upgradable thing? You got Cordell Hodge, who we know his special teams value. He made, obviously, the game-winning play against Tampa Bay last year. And then you got the two guys that I think people are going to be keeping a very close eye on. Casey Washington. Nick Nash is a very popular guy from the undrafted free agents. And then you can even throw Chris Blair in there. How are you viewing this receiver position for the team? Do you see Ray potentially having a competition? Or is it pretty like what I just named is pretty much what it's going to be, and it's just a matter of who makes it out of the end? Because I'm assuming the perception right now is they may keep 5 unless they decide to keep 6.
Yeah, I think they'll keep 6 because I think the 11 will still be their sort of base package. I'm curious what they do with the slot. You look at the receiver group that they brought in, and really Jamal Agnew and Ray McLeod are the only small receivers. Like they had Philip Dorsett. He was recently released. Yep. So now it's really just Agnew who is going to return. He's going to be a return specialist. I hope he's, healthy, because he's still a very good returner when he's healthy. But Ray is sort of the last guy that's like a small receiver. And like Ray's good. Like I think he definitely outperformed expectations. I think he's an interesting player. He offers them the best probably receiver in the slot, but he's a slot only guy who doesn't offer you any blocking. And that's not necessarily a problem in a vacuum, but the way they want this offense to work is similar to Los Angeles, where they want these guys to be interchangeable and they don't want to have to rotate very often. Now, that doesn't mean that they never do. They do sometimes, but you look at who they brought in. You mentioned Chris Blair, you mentioned Casey Washington, you mentioned Nick Nash, Mekhi Polk, David Sills, like all these guys. They're all 6'2", 6'3", big receivers. They want a big slot. Like that's what they're moving towards. They want Drake and that slot guy to be able to swap places at any time and it not mess up the offense. You can't really do that with Ray. That's really the only thing. And the fact he doesn't block super well because he's small. So I think long-term, they will be going for a big slot type, similar to what the Rams did with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua and those guys, and they'll rotate them. And then they want that sort of fast Z receiver in the other outside spot, which they have in Darnell Mooney. The Rams, have had Tutu Atwell. They had Demarcus Robinson at certain points doing that. They've had guys out there doing that role, but I think in Atlanta, they've got Mooney, who they love in that role. It's perfect for him. And Mooney can move into the slot too. He's got lots of experience there. So technically all 3 guys could interchange. And I think that's one of the strengths of the offense is you're always able to keep defenses guessing because they can't pigeonhole any of these receivers into a spot where they know, like, we could have somebody lined up on Drake, but he could be in the slot, or somebody else could be in the slot, or whatever. They can't really get too comfortable, playing guys on sides or anything like that. If they want their best corner on Drake, that guy's going to have to travel because Drake will go in the slot and so forth. And I think they'd like to have the blocking too. I think that's the thing. If you're going to play Pitts as your tight end, you're losing the tight end blocking. So you probably need your slot to be a better blocker to kind of compensate for that. And that's the one thing. If they have Pitts and Mooney or Pitts and Ray on the field, now you've got two guys that really aren't pluses as blockers. Although I will give Pitts credit. I think he has put in effort to be a passable blocker now. Like he's not getting blown up anymore. But I don't think he's really blocking, anything other than maybe linebackers and secondary players with like great efficiency. But apparently he bulked up. He gained 5 pounds, according to Daniel Flick. So, I think he's working to become a more complete tight end, and maybe the sort of it'll turn at some point there. But I'm really curious to see, because I don't think Ray has to worry about his roster spot or anything like that. He's still a good value at his contract, and he's still the best pure receiver they have, and will probably always be on the field in like obvious passing situations and stuff like that. But, Casey Washington is a guy that Penix does seem to have a good rapport with. We didn't really see a ton last year. Unfortunately, right when Penix started playing, Casey Washington got hurt and missed kind of the end of the season. So it was unfortunate there. But Nick Nash is really interesting. Again, not a super athletic receiver, but great hands, great size, and he just has an instinctual feel for the position. He's only played it for 2 years, but he's really starting to pick up nuances that some guys just never get. So, I'm really interested in seeing him, and I think he's got a pathway to being a good wide receiver 3 in the NFL. So I'm interested to see there. Him and Casey Washington are probably battling it out for one spot. And then like the guy I would say is maybe the biggest threat to Ray in terms of playtime is Hodge, because we saw Hodge start a game towards the end of the year, and he's a better blocker, and he gives you that inside-outside versatility that Ray doesn't have. Also, he has a single-digit number, so that means obviously that he's a starter now. So, so that means that he's definitely starting over now. But he's the one I would probably watch the most closely, because I think he's shown that he's a better receiver than most people give him credit for. I don't know that he's a better receiver than Ray, like from a pure receiver standpoint, but he is a good blocker, and he gives you that versatility that Ray doesn't. So I'm curious to see how that shakes out, but I think based on the moves they've made, they clearly want a bigger slot and just bigger receivers outside of the Z spot with Mooney. They want the big receivers out there, and I'm curious to see how much they want that. Like, do we see that this year, or is that sort of a next year thing once Ray's contract is up?
Yeah, and I think too, like I said, it's always good to have that competition at that spot. And listen, Cordell Hodge is not a slow guy. Cordell is pretty fast. Like we saw on the game-winning touchdown against Tampa Bay, he burned their secondary. Like, so it's one of those things where if they wanted to go in that direction, the question is how much of a drop-off would they really be? Because it seems like Ray, especially when last year they brought in Rondell and they brought in Ray, it seemed like they wanted a guy who could maybe do end arounds out in space. Obviously the screen game, which I know ripped people's hair out because it seemed like it was going well. Though people saw Penix did some screens, it seemed a little bit more smoother, maybe because Kirk isn't getting it there as fast, and Penix can come just like boom, like a smooth motion, and maybe that improves it. But it seems like obviously they want to use guys in space, which obviously when you have speed and you have playmakers and shifty guys, that's obviously a goal of an offense when you have that. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how that plays out. I'll let you one last question, then I'll let you go, Kevin. So obviously, you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier. So Tyler Allgeier, was entering, pretty much last year things before Falcons have to make a decision on him on if he's going to stay. I think a lot of people know that with the type of running back he could be, people think he'd be a starter. Kind of gives me LaDainian Thomas, Michael Turner vibes a little bit, where when he gets to play, he kind of can show you like, oh, he can play. And remember, he did have the Falcons rookie rushing record without even playing the first handful of games at the beginning of that year. So there's a lot of like talent with him. But obviously Bijan's such a great player. It's like, it's always hard, I think, justifying, okay, how many reps does Bijan get compared to Tyler? Because Bijan, if he's not in certain situations, why is your best running back not out there? But then I remember there was like a play Bijan got stopped on like 4th and 1, and they're like, why is Tyler not in there? And it's just, it's just that running back, like who's the best fit for these situations. Do you think the Falcons are not probably going to worry about maybe addressing that position till next year? Because I mean, they obviously have got some, undrafted guys. They drafted Jason McClellan. They got Casey Washington or Carlos Washington, I believe. There. But I don't know if anybody sees them as like RB2s. Again, it depends on how they feel about Bijan. Well, what do you think about Tyler's future in Atlanta? Do you think he legitimately someone they would be willing to move, or they're saying, hey, we're going to write this out for one more year with this duo?
I think if someone comes with like a really good offer for Allgeier, like a 4th or higher, probably higher, I think they would be smart to consider it, but they don't want to move Allgeier. I think he's one of the best values on the roster right now in that, if you do lose Bijan for any amount of time, you don't have to stop emphasizing the run game at all. You can keep emphasizing the run game and give Allgeier the carries. And the offense will look different, but I don't know that there will be a huge like rushing production drop off. I think the receiving production is where we'll see the biggest difference, because I think Bijan this year is going to be a very focused receiver. And I think if like this kind of ties into the Ray thing, like I think if they do go for that bigger slot, Bijan kind of becomes that yards after catch speed threat, used on wheel routes and all kinds of stuff out of the backfield and just leaks and things like that to kind of be that outlet and that yards after catch player. If they're going for a bigger slot presence. But Allgeier's just a really good running back, and he deserves like to go be a starter. And he will be. And it's honestly good for him that he's not had the gotten beat up over the years. Like he's had the 1 year of huge carries and then it's kind of petered out. So he'll be relatively fresh, even though he's not going to be a super young running back at that point. He hasn't taken the beating that most of these guys have, so he'll be fine. I think someone's going to give him a starting contract and he will be a starter somewhere. And if nobody comes with that contract, the Falcons would be wise to give him a small contract, like, even like a $4 million a year type of contract for a running back, just to keep him around as insurance, because if the run game is going to be emphasized, you need someone that's going to be a good backup. But I think if you can get a good pick for him, you should probably take it. But it's a tough call. But the thing a lot of people are saying is like, oh, well, you'll just get a comp pick for him next year. This team is really bad about getting comp picks. Okay. And the reason for that is that they're not in a position where they can afford to just like let guys walk and not bring in replacements, which is what teams like the Ravens do, because they've got so much draft talent. They're just re-signing their own guys and letting some of them walk. So they're not really offsetting their picks. The Falcons aren't there yet. So next year, there's going to be a big free agency year. We talked about how they're going to have all this money next year. That means they're going to be signing players. So if they're signing players, they're not getting comp picks. So you can't really depend on getting any comp picks next year. So in that case, if a team comes with like a 4th or a 3rd for Allgeier, you probably take that pick so you can get some value for him. But, I think the other side of the coin is if you're on a great trajectory, the Falcons come out hot. They're looking good in November. They're looking like a contender. Things are going great, all that stuff. I think they would probably just hold him because they don't want a Bijan injury to derail their run game. And at that point, if you're looking like you're going to be a playoff contender, you just hold Allgeier. You say like, forget it. We're not too worried about next year. Like we're not too worried about a 4th round pick next year or a 3rd round pick next year. We're going to keep Allgeier for our playoff hopes. This team hasn't been in that position for a while. So I understand this might be a foreign concept to Falcons fans that have, been only watching the team for the past like 7 years, which actually is not really recent. That's actually a really long time without being in the playoffs. But I think at that point they just hold him as insurance and like, look, we don't want to risk too much, for a future pick, especially not one that's like a premium pick. We'll just hold him and hopefully that'll pay dividends down the stretch when, especially if they want to give Bijan some rest. We didn't really get to see that much at all last year because the Falcons they didn't really lead a lot of games. They did win a fair number, but they didn't really have a demand, like a lead. They weren't playing with a lead much. So if they can get to that point this year where they actually are maybe beating up on some teams, that's where I think we could really get some value out of Allgeier, where it's like, okay, Bijan, come, put the towel on, put the hat on, and Allgeier is going to go get 15 carries in the 3rd and 4th quarter to just grind this team into dust and pad his stats and that's going to help his free agency next year too. So I would love to see that, if we could get some nice, grinded out finishes with Allgeier to really take advantage of his skill set there too.
Yeah, man. And listen, like I said, he's done great work. And like I said, it's a different style, more of a bruising style of runner. So, when you sometimes maybe need to play a more physical game or like I said, short yardage, he could be very good for that and stuff. And I think Bijan obviously is special in his own way and what he can do, and he's looking to try to take a Saquon type of jump this year, which would be incredible if he could do that. So it'll be very interesting because it seems like I said, there's a lot of talent on this team across the board. I think we see that especially on the offensive end. And now it's just about getting all of it to come together, hopefully getting some good, health luck this year. Even on the defensive line, Braylon Trice is going to be back this year. We'll see how he looks trying to come back from injury. So very excited about what's about to come on with this team. As we continue to get through camp and get closer to training camp, we'll be able to get more, we'll get more of an idea of what we're looking at. But I appreciate you, Kevin, man, for coming on to the show for sure, man. Let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm at Falcoholic Kevin on the Hell site, formerly known as Twitter. You can find all of my written stuff on thefalcoholic.com. The show is The Falcoholic on YouTube. It's Dirty Birds and Brews on your podcast platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everything like that. And yeah, we got live shows on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, and then usually between 2 and 3 shows a week in the off season. We usually have something coming out like Tuesday and something coming out Friday, along with the Wednesday lives. We may have some weeks in the deep dead zone where there's only 2 episodes, but we'll be having speaking of Daniel Flick, we'll have Daniel Flick on for Friday's episode, and hoping to get Myles Garrett and Joe Patrick on over the next couple of weeks to get their takes on sort of what we've seen from minicamp. And then we'll have, I believe, Trayshawn Diaz and Alan Stirk helping me out with the roster review series, which is going to be our deep June breakdown, looking at every position on the roster and sort of our thoughts on where it stands and what could be improved, what we like, what we don't like, all that sort of stuff. So that'll be kind of rolling out over the next month or so.
Hey, as you can see, this man has a lot going on. So y'all definitely go check him out for sure. And obviously, guys, y'all know we're going to keep it up over here with all of our Atlanta Falcons coverage as we continue to go through camp. Obviously, like I've said, I'm expecting to be at camp, so I hope to have some stuff from there. Hopefully, I see Kevin out there as well. And me and him link up for the first time in person. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment down below about anything we discussed. Also, follow me on, formerly Twitter at Bryce_2K for all my takes and everything that happens on the team. And, we'll have to see what happens with the Falcons as we move on through the offseason and we enter the dead zone. But that's Kevin. I'm Bryce. We'll see you next time.